You know what's wild? How quickly people turn on you when you make decisions they can't understand. I'm Vivian, I'm 34, and I need to tell you about the most insane 6 months of my life. Because honestly, I'm still processing how everything went so sideways so fast. Look, I've always been spiritual. Not like crystal-obsessed Instagram spiritual, but genuinely connected to energies and intuition that most people just ignore. My husband Trevor, well, ex-husband now. He tolerated it. Rolled his eyes when I'd come back from readings, made jokes about my woo-woo stuff, but he wasn't completely hostile about it. We'd been married 8 years, have a 6-year-old daughter named Ruby, and honestly, I thought we were solid. Trevor works in some corporate thing, numbers and spreadsheets and boring conference calls. I do administrative work part-time so I can be around for Ruby after school. Normal life, you know? Suburban house, minivan, the whole thing. But here's what Trevor never understood. I'm not just playing around with this spiritual stuff. I have a gift. I can sense things other people miss. 3 years ago, when I was pregnant with Ruby, my psychic Madame Celeste told me I was having a boy with blonde hair. Okay, she was wrong about the gender, but Ruby came out with the most gorgeous blonde curls you've ever seen. And 2 years before I met Trevor, Celeste told me I'd meet my soulmate soon. 3 months later, boom. There's Trevor at my friend's birthday party, making me laugh until my sides hurt. So when I found out I was pregnant again last fall, of course I was excited. Ruby had been begging for a sibling, and at 34, I figured this might be my last shot. Trevor was thrilled, started talking about converting the spare room into a nursery, looking up baby names, the whole 9 yards. But something felt different this time. Call it mother's intuition, call it spiritual awareness, but there was this heaviness around the pregnancy that I couldn't shake. That's when I knew I needed to see Celeste. I didn't tell Trevor about the appointment. Why would I? He'd just make some sarcastic comment about throwing money away on fortune-telling and put his negative energy all over it. Instead, I told him I was meeting my sister Carmen for lunch and some shopping. He kissed me goodbye, told me to have fun, completely clueless about what I was really doing. Celeste has this little studio downtown, above a vintage clothing shop. Usually, the moment I walk in there, I feel this sense of peace wash over me. Her space is warm, filled with candles and crystals and these beautiful tapestries that make everything feel magical. But that day, something was off. The air felt thick, heavy. Even Celeste looked different when she opened the door. Paler, more serious than I'd ever seen her. "Vivian," she said, and her voice was barely above a whisper. "Come in. We need to talk." The reading started normally enough. She had me sit across from her small round table while she shuffled her deck, asking the cards to show her what I needed to know about this pregnancy. But when she started laying out the cards, her hands began trembling. The Tower. Death. The Devil. Cards that made my stomach clench, even though I didn't know exactly what they meant. Then she placed her hands on my belly, something she'd done before, something that always felt comforting and warm. But this time she jerked her hands back like she'd touched something burning. "Oh, honey," she breathed, and I swear the temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. "This soul, the one trying to enter this baby, it's not meant to be here." I felt my heart start racing. "What do you mean?" Celeste closed her eyes, her face scrunched in concentration. "I'm seeing darkness, Vivian. Terrible, terrible darkness. This child, if born, will cause immense pain and suffering. I see violence. I see blood." She opened her eyes and stared right at me. "Innocent people will die because of what's growing inside you right now." The room started spinning. This couldn't be right. This was my baby, Trevor's baby. How could something so wanted, so planned for, be evil? But then I remembered all the times Celeste had been right before. The pregnancy prediction. Meeting Trevor. That time she warned me not to take a trip to visit my college roommate, and later I found out there'd been a massive car accident on the exact highway I would have taken. She'd never steered me wrong. "What am I supposed to do?" I whispered. Celeste reached across the table and took my hands. "You know what you have to do, honey. You have to prevent this darkness from entering the world. This soul is trying to use your body as a vessel, but you have the power to stop it." I sat there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, letting her words sink in. My unborn child was going to be a monster. A killer. And only I could prevent that horror from being unleashed on the world. When I left Celeste's studio, my mind was made up. I had 2 days to figure out the logistics, but the decision was already done. I was going to save countless innocent lives by making the hardest choice a mother could ever make. Trevor was in the kitchen when I got home, humming some stupid song while he chopped vegetables for dinner. He looked so happy, so blissfully unaware of what I'd just learned. How could I explain that our baby, our supposedly perfect, wanted baby, was actually going to grow up to be a psychopath? He'd never understand. He'd call me crazy, tell me Celeste was a fraud, probably drag me to some therapist who'd try to convince me I was having a breakdown. "How was lunch with Carmen?" he asked, not even looking up from the cutting board. "Fine," I managed. "Just normal sister stuff." That night, lying next to Trevor while he slept peacefully, one hand resting on my belly like he'd been doing every night since we found out about the pregnancy, I stared at the ceiling and wrestled with the weight of what I had to do. This wasn't just about me and Trevor anymore. This was about protecting society from a future monster. I made the appointment the next morning. The clinic was in a part of town I'd never been to before, tucked between a laundromat and a tax office. Nothing fancy, nothing that screamed medical facility, which I guess was the point. I told Trevor I was spending the afternoon with Carmen again. She'd agreed to cover for me if he called, though I hadn't told her exactly what kind of covering I needed. "You've been seeing a lot of your sister lately," Trevor commented as he grabbed his keys for work. "Everything okay?" "Yeah, she's just going through some stuff," I lied smoothly. "You know how Carmen gets when she's stressed." He kissed my forehead, then leaned down to kiss my belly. "Take care of my little peanut in there," he whispered to the baby, and I had to turn away so he wouldn't see the tears starting in my eyes. If he only knew that his little peanut could grow up to be the next Ted Bundy or Charles Manson. The procedure itself was surprisingly quick and clinical. I'd expected more drama, more emotion, but it was just medical, professional. The doctor explained everything in neutral, matter-of-fact terms, and I felt strangely disconnected from my own body, like I was watching everything happen to someone else. Afterwards, sitting in the recovery room with a heating pad on my abdomen and a cup of lukewarm apple juice, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Like this dark, heavy cloud that had been following me around for days had finally lifted. I'd done it. I'd saved lives. However many people that evil soul would have hurt, they were safe now because of my choice. Carmen picked me up without asking too many questions. She could tell I was drained, emotionally and physically, so she just drove me home in comfortable silence. When we pulled into my driveway, she squeezed my hand and said, "Sometimes we have to make impossible choices, Viv. I hope you know I support whatever you decided." I almost broke down crying right there in her car. Finally, someone who got it. Someone who understood that sometimes being a mother means making sacrifices that other people will never comprehend. That evening, Trevor made my favorite pasta dish and kept hovering around me, asking if I felt okay, if I needed anything. "You seem different today," he said during dinner. "Quieter. Are you feeling sick?" Of course I seem different. I'd just prevented a catastrophe. I'd just saved countless innocent lives by making the most difficult decision of my entire life. But how could I explain that to someone who thought my spiritual gifts were just silly superstition? "Just tired," I told him. "Pregnancy hormones, you know?" He reached across the table and took my hand. "I love you so much, Viv, you and our baby. I can't wait to meet this little one." I squeezed his hand back and smiled, but inside, my heart was breaking. Not for the baby, that had to be done, but for Trevor. For what I was going to have to put him through when I finally told him the truth. I managed to keep the secret for exactly 3 days. 3 days of Trevor talking excitedly about baby names and nursery themes. 3 days of him reading pregnancy books and downloading apps to track our progress. 3 days of watching him be so completely, innocently happy about something that no longer existed. On the 4th day, over breakfast, I couldn't take it anymore. "Trevor," I said, setting down my coffee cup with hands that were trembling slightly, "I need to tell you something important. About the baby." He looked up from his phone, where he'd been reading some article about prenatal vitamins. "What's wrong? Are you feeling sick? Do we need to call the doctor?" I took a deep breath. This was it. I had to make a very difficult decision. I went to see Celeste a few days ago, and she had a vision about our baby. A terrible vision. Trevor's expression shifted from concern to something harder to read. Okay. She saw that this child was going to grow up to do horrible things, to hurt people, to kill innocent people, Trevor. The soul trying to enter this baby was evil, and I had to stop it. The silence stretched between us for what felt like forever. Trevor just stared at me, his coffee growing cold in his hands. "Vivian," he said finally, his voice very quiet and very careful. "What exactly are you telling me?" "I had the procedure," I said. 3 days ago, I ended the pregnancy because I had to protect the world from what that child would have become. The mug slipped from Trevor's hands and shattered against the kitchen floor, coffee splashing everywhere. But he didn't move to clean it up. He just kept staring at me like I'd grown a second head. Then he exploded. "You what?" The words came out like a roar, loud enough that I worried the neighbors would call the police. "You killed our baby because some con artist told you to?" "She's not a con artist, Trevor. She's been right about everything. She's a fraud." He slammed his fist on the table so hard that the salt and pepper shakers jumped. "And you're... Jesus Christ, Vivian. What have you done?" I tried to stay calm, tried to explain about the vision, about the darkness Celeste had seen, about the innocent lives I'd saved. But Trevor wasn't listening. He was pacing around the kitchen, running his hands through his hair, muttering words I couldn't quite catch, but that sounded like curses. "This isn't about some psychic bullshit," he finally said, whirling around to face me. "This is about you making a decision about our child without even discussing it with me. This is about you throwing away 8 years of marriage for some fortune teller's ghost story." "It wasn't a ghost story," I said, standing up to match his energy. "It was a warning. And yes, it was my decision, because it was my body carrying that baby." "Don't." His voice dropped to something dangerous and cold. "Don't you dare turn this into some feminist empowerment bullshit. This was our child, Vivian. Ours. And you took that away from me, from us, from Ruby, because some stranger told you a scary story." We fought for 2 hours. 2 hours of Trevor calling me insane, telling me I needed psychiatric help, accusing me of betraying everything we'd built together. 2 hours of me trying to make him understand that this was bigger than just us, that I'd prevented a future serial killer from being born, that sometimes mothers have to make impossible sacrifices. Finally, Trevor stopped yelling and just looked at me. Really looked at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. "I don't know who you are," he said quietly. "The woman I married would never do something like this. The woman I married would have talked to me, would have trusted me enough to share her fears, would have worked through this together instead of sneaking around behind my back. I'm the same person. No." He shook his head. "You're not. You're someone who values the opinion of a stranger over her own husband. Someone who makes life-altering decisions in secret. Someone who can kill our child and then come home and act normal for 3 days." That word again. Kill. Like I was some kind of monster instead of a mother who'd made an impossible choice to protect the world. Trevor left that afternoon with 2 suitcases and his laptop bag. Not to his brother's place like some cliché. He stayed with his coworker Dave, whose wife had just had a baby, and who probably filled Trevor's head with all kinds of poison about what I'd done. When Ruby asked where Daddy was, I told her he was on a work trip. She's only 6, but she's smart. She knew something was wrong. 2 weeks later, the divorce papers arrived. 2 weeks. After 8 years of marriage, Trevor needed exactly 14 days to decide our relationship was over. His lawyer was asking for joint custody of Ruby and claiming I was mentally unstable and potentially dangerous. Can you believe that shit? Just because I'm spiritually aware and made a difficult decision doesn't make me unstable. I tried calling Trevor multiple times, texting him, even showing up at Dave's house once to try to explain things properly. But he wouldn't listen. When I knocked on Dave's door, Trevor came outside and told me if I didn't leave immediately, he was calling the police, like I was some kind of stalker, instead of his wife trying to save their marriage. My own family wasn't much better. When my mother found out what happened, Trevor told her his version, of course. She took his side completely. "Vivian Louise," she said during one of our phone calls, using my full name like I was 12 years old again. "I raised you better than this. You should have talked to Trevor before making such a drastic decision." "You don't understand, Mom," Celeste saw. "I don't want to hear about that psychic nonsense. What I want to hear is that you're getting professional help and trying to save your marriage." Even Carmen, who'd been supportive at first, started questioning me once she heard Trevor's side of things. "Maybe you should consider counseling," she suggested when I called her crying after another failed attempt to reach Trevor. "Just to work through whatever you're going through right now." "I'm not going through anything," I snapped. "I made a hard choice to protect people, and everyone's treating me like I'm the problem here." The only person who truly understood was Celeste. During our weekly sessions, she reassured me that I'd done the right thing, that the vision she'd had was real and terrifying. "People fear what they don't understand, honey," she told me, holding my hands across her little table. "But you saved countless innocent lives. That soul was pure evil, and you prevented it from entering this world. You're a hero, even if no one else can see it." Her words gave me strength during the hardest weeks, when even my closest friends started treating me like I was fragile or broken. When they'd lower their voices around me and exchange those looks, you know the ones, that said they thought I was having some kind of mental breakdown. The divorce was finalized 4 months after Trevor left. 4 months of mediation and lawyers and paperwork. All because my husband couldn't understand that sometimes being a wife and mother means making sacrifices that other people will never comprehend. Trevor got to keep the house. Our house that I'd helped decorate and maintain for 6 years. I had to move into a cramped 2-bedroom apartment across town, struggling to afford the rent on my part-time salary. Ruby splits her time between us now, which means half the time I'm alone in this tiny space, listening to my upstairs neighbors argue and wondering how my life fell apart so completely. But I don't regret what I did. Not for a second. 8 months after the divorce was final, I saw Trevor at the grocery store. I was picking up ingredients for Ruby's favorite mac and cheese. It was my weekend with her, when I spotted him in the produce section. He looked different. Healthier, maybe. Like he'd been working out more. His hair was styled differently, and he was wearing clothes I'd never seen before. He wasn't alone. The woman with him was probably 28, maybe 30 at most. Petite, with perfectly straight teeth, and one of those effortlessly put-together looks that some women just seem to have naturally. She was examining avocados like it was the most important decision in the world, and Trevor was watching her with this soft expression I remembered from our early dating days. They were both wearing wedding rings. Trevor noticed me before I could decide whether to approach or escape down the cereal aisle. For a second, neither of us moved. Then he said something to the woman, his new wife, apparently, and walked over to where I was standing with my cart. "Vivian," he said, his voice polite but distant. Like I was an acquaintance from work instead of someone he'd shared a bed with for 8 years. "Hey," I managed. "You look good." "Thanks, you too." It was a lie. I knew I looked tired and stressed because that's exactly how I felt most days. "How's Ruby?" "She's great. She's with you next weekend, right?" "Yeah." He glanced back at his new wife, who was pretending to be absorbed in selecting organic spinach, but was obviously listening to our conversation. "Listen, I hope you're doing well, getting help and everything." There it was again. The assumption that I was the one who needed fixing. "I'm exactly where I need to be," I told him. And I meant it. Maybe I was struggling financially. Maybe Ruby asked uncomfortable questions about why Mommy and Daddy couldn't live together anymore. Maybe some nights I lay awake wondering if there was something I could have done differently to make Trevor understand. But I'd made the right choice. The hard choice. The choice that saved lives. "That's good," Trevor said, though his expression suggested he didn't quite believe me. "Well, I should get back to." "Enjoy your new life," I said, nodding toward his wife, who'd moved on to the tomatoes, but was still clearly eavesdropping. He nodded once and walked away, slipping his arm around his new wife's waist as they headed toward the bakery section. I watched them go, noting how she leaned into him, how he bent down to whisper something that made her laugh. Standing there in the produce section with my lonely little cart and my discount store clothes, I felt something I hadn't expected: pity. Not for myself, but for Trevor. He was so closed off to spiritual truths, so trapped in his logical black and white world. He'd lost a wife who was brave enough to make impossible decisions, who was connected to forces beyond his understanding. His loss, honestly. Sure, I might be alone most of the time now. Sure, I might be working extra shifts just to afford my crappy apartment and Ruby's school supplies. Sure, my own family thinks I'm crazy, and my ex-husband has moved on with some basic woman who probably thinks a horoscope is the height of spiritual awareness. But at least I can sleep at night knowing I prevented something terrible from happening. Somewhere out there, people are alive today because I listened to Celeste's warning and made the hardest choice a mother can make. That has to count for something. That has to be worth everything I lost. Right?